And the idea is that the demographic circumstances and typical access to resources of that family would allow them to recover from that situational poverty over time.
Right. So chronic is repeatedly, it's very generational, so it tends to continue over
Yes.
a long period of time. And
Yes.
situational is like every here and there, just because something catastrophic happened.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So how does that then define your work in poverty? How do you take all of that into your work?
So, as you know in the course, what we surveyed...
I know a lot of this.
Oh, no, that's okay.
I still have to ask though.
Yes, of course you do. And I appreciate the question because it allows me to think about that a lot of the components of the course, which I should say grew out of an initiative of the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Yeah.
They framed an initiative as the leading educational access project. So the idea was to widen access for traditionally underserved and marginalized populations, and to strengthen the quality of educational experience once they got access.
Right.
And so we started with basic concepts about poverty. Then we explored effective practices and strategies from the turnaround research, from schools research, evidence-based practice. And then we also surveyed, topics such as brain-compatible teaching and learning, executive function, self-regulation. And so the appeal for me is the particular importance to students living in poverty and the application to wider, really all groups of students. And so the power of this work to strengthen instructional leadership and instruction for all students, and to strengthen the quality of those experiences for students once they gain access.
Right. Exactly. So not only get into the access, but after they get the access, making sure it's of high quality, so that was worth getting to.
Yes.
Which is a huge problem, because everyone's like, oh no,
Yes.
there's these resources, but then you get those resources and they're not what you really need.
Yeah.
And they're not effective. So awesome. Does that only apply to Massachusetts, or are you guys scaling outwards?
Interesting you should say that the work started in Massachusetts, and several of us, I recently, or last June, had the opportunity to travel to Wyoming as a guest of the Wyoming Department of Education, and as part of a series of professional development activities that I facilitated. One of those experiences was improving outcomes for students living in poverty. And I am scheduled to travel to Alaska.
Right, I remember that too.
In late May, to provide what the agency in Alaska who's sponsoring the trip is describing as a LEAP Academy, a leading educational access academy project, or academy for the educators who gather. So because the work really has the potential to improve outcomes for traditionally underserved students, students living in poverty particularly, and other underserved populations, students who are identified for special education, and students who particularly have been identified for less inclusive settings when they are identified for special education, English learners, struggling or less ready readers and writers. This work has the potential really for improving practice and therefore outcomes for all of these students.
Right. So with that practice, how does mindset tie into that, because you talk a lot about perspective and seeing things not from just your cultural norms or how you're teaching, but asking yourself, actually, what am I doing wrong, not the student?
Yeah.
So how does that mindset come into play?
Well, I would say two things to that. One is this is definitely grounded, anchored, and committed to an asset-based view of educators and also young people.
1 second.
Yes.
I normally don't like touching other people's phones, but
I should just be sure that I shut this off too. I wasn't sure if it was my phone.
Proactiveness.
I wasn't sure if it was my phone. Yeah. Okay. So first, it's an asset-based view, not only for the young people, but also for the adults.
Yeah.
Right. So if it's true that young people are inherently and completely good, if that's a story that I invite people to try, then it's also true of the adults who work with them and the adults who care for them, their parents and guardians, educators, right, all the adults who work with them. So it's definitely an asset-based view which holds open the possibility and the promise of growth and widened opportunity in the right settings. Right. So when they're in an environment of caring and connection, relationship with adults, in an environment of effective instructional practice and effective practice in general related to young people, in an environment where there for each child is not only a stable relationship with at least one adult, but also evidence-based practice. And an able and committed mentor, the research tells us that we can expect growth for these young people. And the second piece, I would say, is, now I forgot, there was a second part to your question. There was part of your question that made me want to comment, and now I forgot. Can you repeat your question, please?
Yes. Yes, so I asked you about how you apply that mindset to your work in poverty.
Yes.
So thinking about, what am I talking? Oh, sorry. So thinking about perspective, how you look at things instead of saying, what can the student do to accommodate my cultural norms? What can I do? Like, what am I doing wrong?
Yes, thank you for reminding me that I would respectfully just change the wording a little bit in terms of the adults.
Please do.
So rather than what am I doing wrong?
Inherent good.
And wanting to hold open a growth mindset for the adults and an asset-based view, and respecting that educators are doing their very best in 2019 with very limited resources.
Sorry, I have to get myself.
Yes.
Please.
So should we pause? Or?
No.
Oh, okay.
This is normal.
Okay. Yeah.
In these
Great.
settings.
Great. Sorry, Laurel. I didn't.
No. Do you want some help?
No, but I know I look like I need some.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
And you probably need your phone and your keys. No, you don't. Okay. All right.
Because she looks like she's just trying to.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. Is this okay?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
But Cameron see you, so actually, could you push it back a little bit?
Push it back a little.
This is really about you, so.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, I'm sorry, I forgot your question. What was it it was about changing it from how you said it, looking at how teachers can improve. Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you. So what I was saying was we hold open for young people, right, the promise of growth and asset-based view in the right conditions, right? Relationship, mentoring, resources. Including evidence-based practice. I want to hold open, I think I was saying that education is hard in 2019. So the practice, yes, it is an understatement. And so educators, right, deserve every appreciation for their efforts, an acknowledgement that given, and I should say this, that if what follows from the premise that people are inherently and completely good is that at any given moment, they're doing the best they can in the circumstances in which they find themselves, and therefore deserve neither reproach nor criticism nor judgment. So I want to be sure to communicate for the adults an invitation for them to be kind and gentle with themselves when they find that their efforts in a particular moment or with a particular child are not causing the outcomes that they would seek. That I invite them to think kindly and say, okay, what am I learning from how this student or this group of students are reacting to the education or the instruction or other intervention that I'm providing? And based on the feedback I'm getting, what can I do differently? Right. And who can help me in that? I don't have to be in this alone.
Key. Yes. That is so key. Yes. That collaborative, the fact that you're part of the Collaborative for Educational Services, you know the importance of collaboration and partnership and reaching out. But most educators don't understand that you don't have to do it alone because they're so burdened with everything. And so it feels like you're alone. Yes. So how would you recommend people go about actually collaborating?
Wow. So...
I know.
So the first is thinking about who is available for collaboration. Okay. So that could be the folks in your immediate setting. It could be the folks, if you're a teacher, the folks in your grade level or content area or department or school or district. It could be folks in the wider communities of which you're a member. So therefore, it could be teachers, educational leaders, educational specialists, psychologists, social workers in a wider setting. And also to remember that those various roles can be available to assist a teacher. And I keep coming back to a teacher and the classroom because the classroom and the interaction between teacher and student, right, is really the focal point and the fulcrum of where growth occurs for teachers. Educational researchers, I'm thinking of Robert Marzano, right, has taught us that of the variables we can control related to student achievement, the strongest correlate of student achievement is the quality of instruction, followed by the quality of instructional leadership. So that's why I really focus on the classroom as the focus of work and of thinking about teaching and learning. So first, think about the variety of roles that could be available for collaboration. Then think about methods of collaboration. So thank goodness that we have technology that enables, right? Sometimes face-to-face collaboration is hard. Yes. So electronic means, digital means for connecting, for sharing work on a particular document, a plan, or a program. And then thinking of, therefore, because of electronic resources, right, who are the wider communities that I can reach out to? So it might be, there might be a state level organization of teachers, of curriculum leaders, of superintendents. There are national organizations of practitioners, right? The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, right? And there's a similar group across disciplines. So really, so just to summarize, thinking of collaboration in terms of what are the roles, what are the means, and what is the scope of widening circles of community to whom I can reach out.
And so how would you propose that you go about trying to access those places? Because everyone's busy.
Yes.
You have high places of authority that either looks at your email and says, okay, I need to read this, or just throws it out. Yes. So how do you go about grabbing the attention of those individuals?
So getting attention, that's another issue. I think the first is the first thought that comes to mind is through personal connection, right? So what personal connections, over a career of almost 3 decades, I've developed personal connections in multiple states. And I imagine that that's true for lots of educators. And not only in our professional lives, but also in our personal lives, right? Who are the people who can be allies and cheerleaders for us?
That's a good way to put it. Right? That's true.
So I would start with personal connections. And then really, what's the message that I want to put out? What's the soundbite? What's the compelling story that moves, touches, or inspires people?
That makes sense.
That's always the goal, I think, because that's really how attention is gotten, because some story has moved, touched, or inspired someone emotionally and towards action.
What is your compelling story?
Should have known.
That was not on my list.
Okay.
It just came out of what you said.
No, I imagine it did.
You don't have to talk.
Can I think about that and circle back? Because my mind is not yet bringing up a compelling story. Where my mind is going, I'm just thinking at this particular moment is I'm thinking of the adults who with whom I was able to connect, because I needed adults with whom I could connect. So I'm thinking of myself as a young person, in school, and needing to be able to connect. And those adults who were available to me. I'm thinking of one person in particular. I'm thinking of her name was Rosemary. She's now deceased, and I'm thinking of how she saw and nurtured from a young person my interest in teaching, and gave me some really highly unusual and spectacular opportunities to teach as a high school student. And I mean to teach other students who were struggling learners, actually.
Peer-to-peer support.
Well, actually, I actually got a whole class. I mean, she taught summer school.
Wow.
She taught summer school students who were repeating Spanish 1, Spanish 2, and under her supervision, allowed me to do really student teaching, allowed me to teach her class.
That's how I got started.
Nice. And so it was the real, this wasn't play. I mean, this was, a condensed, they needed to recover a year's course in 6 weeks.
Now we call it credit recovery.
Recovery, yes.
Yeah.
Right. And they needed to recover that, and she really vested in me a great deal of confidence in giving me the time and opportunity, among 30 class sessions, to teach and to do a good enough job to really advance the course and that learning experience. This was high stakes for students. They needed to recover the credit and to earn a passing grade to meet a high school graduation requirement. So that was really great confidence, right? That was vested in me. And I think through the connection that I developed with her and the confidence she reposed in me, I was able to just really grow on that and really grow with that opportunity to teach those kids and to develop the self-esteem and the self-pride that came with
being put in a position of high responsibility and leadership.
Yes.
Right. So working with youth and young adults, I'm not going to say children, but work with youth and young adults in poverty and experiencing trauma, giving them that sense of I can lead despite my circumstances, or I can have the potential to change someone's life on a large scale, because you said you had an entire class, which at a young age can be very intimidating.
Yes.
And coming out of poverty, you can question whether or not you're equipped to do so.
Yes.
But because you had someone who saw that in you and nurtured that, not just saw it and put you there, but nurtured you and supported you, you were able to see that you could do that and dream about even more that you could ever imagine.
Yes, and I want to, certainly a number of students in that course lived in poverty or very close to it. Just to clarify that I myself did not grow up in poverty. But I taught students in those early years who had that experience.
Okay, and that kind of maximizes it then, because you're someone who didn't grow up in that circumstance, who were put in that position, who's trusted in that position to have the high level, the high capacity to understand the responsibility that you were holding.
Yes.
That's a lot.
Yes.
But obviously you did very well, so I'm going to take that with me and teach that to my youth, my flock.
Yeah, so that would definitely be my compelling story. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for sharing, although I almost missed it.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't want to keep you too much longer, so I'm just going to ask about getting the opportunities and funding to do this kind of work.
Yes.
So I'm going to go with what I wrote here so I don't miss anything. There are issues with social enterprises, organizations, and projects that aim to seek funding to host workshops, conferences, events, and grow their businesses and organizations. Are there any tips that you have? What is your advice for those who want to get their ideas in front of an audience? How do you go about securing that speaker opportunity, or even looking for those opportunities and getting the funding to fund your project, especially if it's dealing with poverty, social good? And feel free to say you're not really sure, or there's different ways, because everyone has their own experience with it.
Yeah, I think I need to say this is not having to find this, having an idea and having to find funding for it.
Or opportunities to get it in front of an audience.
I feel less qualified in that area. Okay. I've had some limited experiences in, for example, finding, securing the backing in terms of funding and mentorship. From business and other community members to fund science inquiry for middle and high school students, and to fund a project that was presented at what we have called a science fair, what we now call a science fair. But really allowing students the opportunity in terms of mentorship and money to pursue an inquiry of their design and to be able to present that. This particular project, the Leading Educational Access Project, as I noted earlier, was the brainchild, the design and of the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and they provided the funding for the design of what was originally a training of trainers.
Right.
And is now, as in our course together, a training of practitioners.
Okay, so would you recommend a partnership with a collaborative or, I don't want to say a coalition because that sounds too military, but a coalition of individuals who are already working on this and seeking support from them? But then do you also have to do trainings and things like that before you seek the funding? So have some kind of portfolio?
Yeah, track record or portfolio. So that's interesting. I guess the question is really about how do you gain access
exactly
to a philanthropic community or philanthropic enterprises that have money for projects of their design towards which your own idea can be married, to which it can be married. Or philanthropists simply willing to fund a good idea within a certain domain, such as eradicating poverty, improving student outcomes, whatever the domain is that a philanthropist might have a particular interest in. And I've done very little of that work. There are other people in development who have done more of that connection making.
Okay. How did you get your start then? And how did you end up getting these opportunities to speak and from your own experience? Because this is not going to apply to everyone, but it is important to just have this in a toolbox.
So this is where I make a plug for serendipity.
Ah, interesting.
This is where I make a plug for tolerating ambiguity, living with ambiguity. I don't like tolerating. Living with ambiguity.
Yeah.
Being open to wherever opportunity might appear and wherever it might lead. Specifically, what that means is I was living in New Jersey. It felt clear to me that I was in a transition to Massachusetts.
Me too. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
And I was looking for the work opportunities that would help me complete that transition. And I found myself, so I was on a job site. I don't even remember which one of a handful I was on.
I can attest to that.
I happened to see a posting for a position, really not so much a position as much as an ad hoc opportunity that I responded to, guessing it was part-time and guessing it would in and of itself not be the opportunity that I needed to make the transition, but I responded to it. And so that was part of my initial work at the Collaborative for Educational Services. But the woman who's now retired, who one of her great gifts, really one of her great gifts was in finding people and seeing the range of assets and gifts that they brought and work they could do.
I see.
And so she hired me to teach in the realm of educator preparation in terms of English learner education. So I had several ad hoc or per diem projects.
Okay.
But there were enough of those that it became clear to her that there was a range of things that I could do that the collaborative needed. And it became clear to me that I could get to do a variety of important work. And so after 4 months of doing this project and then that project and write a proposal for this and facilitate this working group and teach this course, that there seemed to be a mutual interest in coming together in a permanent full-time way, because really of this woman's ability to see,
right, making the right connections, even though you weren't trying.
Right.
So
she's, can you do this? We have this need. Can you do that? And I did enough of this and that, and I was willing to kind of see where this went.
Right. That's important.
Being open to one opportunity after another, that we decided to join forces, as it were, in a full-time relationship. And early May 1st, actually, 2019 will be my 5th year anniversary here as a full-time.
Congratulations!
Yeah, thank you.
This seems it seems like life. It's a little journey. I'm going through your life's history, and it's fascinating because it seems like so many other stories, right? But yours happened in a very different way, even though the principles are still the same.
Yeah.
And so that's fascinating to me.
Thank you.
Oh, no, were you done? I'm sorry.
I am done. Thank you with that answer.
Aww.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I just like to reiterate what I got from your story. So the first thing is being open to opportunity, but not sitting on your butt and waiting for things to happen. Actually getting out there, applying for things, looking for things, and seeing what accepts you, and then trying it out if that's what you got. And if you don't like it, continue searching and doing what you can, trying to find out what you want to do, who you are, where you want to be. And again, being willing to try these things and being open to trying these things. And somehow, some way, which is the hard part, those connections will be made. You will have those relationships. You will have that job that you want after you go through what you need to go through to be where you want to be. And I think that's the hardest thing, just trusting the process, so to speak. So that's what I'm doing. So thank you again so much, Mr. Albert Mussad. Is there anything you want to leave on poverty in general for our audience? Because I've kept you for a long time. So.
I think my thought goes to students living in poverty specifically.
That used to be me.
And also all young people, is to remember to start with taking inventory of assets.
Yeah, that is important. I missed that one. That's the first thing, yes.
So in doing an inventory of assets, which could certainly be for ourselves as well as others, and noticing and thinking about how those assets can be leveraged to strengthen, to meet in those places of challenge and current struggle for learners.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm so excited. I can't wait to go back and look at this and just reminisce on everything I learned. And
thank you.
Cohesive. This is the end of it. I'm just talking now.
Okay.
Like, I am so ready to go back and just look at things and synthesize all the information and then put it all into the book I'm working on. And yeah, I'm excited.
So let's see. So I started as a teacher of English as a second language in grades K through 12, and I taught high school Spanish.
I heard you speak a little bit.
I did speak a little bit, a little bit of Spanish, and then went on and had a number of years in New Jersey public schools as a curriculum leader, professional developer, educational program leader. I supervised. I started supervising language education programs and eventually supervised across the curriculum educational programs in grades K through 12. And
when you say supervise, do you mean curriculum? You supervise how the curriculum was formed and made and implemented, or other supervision?
No, I think that's a great way to describe it. I think the writing of curriculum, the design of educational programs, instructional implementation. So I supervise instruction, and also supervise instructional leaders in school-based leaders in terms of implementing those programs. I am the middle child of immigrants from Egypt, and recognize that more and more I'm recognizing the legacy of that culture, and also my experience as a child of immigrants, and I'm grateful for all of that. I had the privilege of earning 3 degrees at Georgetown University.
Accomplished immigrant child, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And wow, that's amazing. Yeah. What are they in?
I earned a bachelor's degree in Spanish and linguistics.
Okay, that explains that.
With a minor in teacher preparation, and I earned a master's degree in applied linguistics, which is language teaching, testing, and learning.
Okay.
It's my first love, and then I earned a PhD also in applied linguistics.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is that, so in terms of coming to the collaborative and teaching instructional education for teachers, was it more semantics-based at first?
You mean my own studies or my experience here at the collaborative?
Your experience instructing teachers.
Oh.
So was that more because of what you majored in? Were they trying to put you in more semantic-based opportunities? And if so, how did you go from semantic-based to doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I really lean on my experience as an educator in K-12 schools, as a teacher and instructional leader. Mm-hmm. To inform my teaching of educators, and really my lifelong interest in evidence-based practice.
Yeah, I noticed that. We're going to get to that in a minute.
Okay.
And with that being said, I have some philosophical questions to ask you too, and I think that's going to be very interesting. Okay. So, you talk a lot about the theory of inherent good of others. I notice you say that a lot.
Yeah.
Which is a very philosophical hot topic in the philosophical world. So could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah.
Like how you came to believe it, why you believe it, and how does that apply to your educational practice?
Yeah. Wow. So, let's see.
You take your time.
Yeah, so I'm going to say over the last 4 years, I have been immersed in a community of people who believe that all of us are inherently and completely good, and that the behavior that we see, and sometimes we behave in ways that don't reflect our goodness, sometimes we behave in ways that contradict our natural inclination towards connection, belonging, joy, our natural assets of creativity, of flexible thinking, resourcefulness, and that when we behave in ways that contradict that inclination and those assets, that the reason for that is essentially because of early distress, that all of us, acquire just because we got born and we grow up and live in the world, and in our families of origin, in our communities, and in the larger society, there are various oppressions enacted on all of us, and all of those experiences can be recorded as distress. And in the present time, we might encounter present time circumstances that trigger or re-stimulate those early distresses, and therefore cause us to act in ways that contradict our inherent nature and our assets in terms of who we are as human beings.
Okay.
To answer your question, was a part of it?
It does.
Okay.
It gave me the process behind the way you think about it,
okay,
which is amazing, because that's pretty much what philosophy is. Okay. Why do you feel this way?
Yeah. I
still want to know, for me personally, and I know philosophers out there also want to know, how does one go about saying a human being is good? What does that mean to you? Because it sounds like belonging, connection. I'm sorry. No, it's okay. For all those wondering what just happened, a staff member just dropped off her things. So, just because I'm not editing that, so.
Okay.
Okay, so for good, typically when we apply that to a human being, we assert that they come into this world innocent. And that is a very controversial thing to believe, just because of the natural state of a person and the genetics and all the characteristics you get as a baby from your parents or your guardians, because these days we have sperm donors and things like that. So from those who make up your genetic code, all those things you get from them, does that also make you innocent? Are you tainted from birth, and thus are you good? And feel free to be like, oh, I don't really know. So. Take your time.
Yeah.
I should also add, I do agree with you, though, on what you said about the oppressions and the tainting of that, and how it changes how we behave and perceive the world.
So I have a limited understanding of findings related to certain conditions or experiences that we have as human beings that science tells us have a genetic base, such as depression, for example.
Let's not even go into that. That is such a...
So I think that there is that school of thought and research, and I'm not qualified to comment on that.
Okay.
I have found it useful.
Okay. In what way? Like religion as a tool useful?
Yeah.
Or useful as it's actually practical?
I have found it practically useful to encounter people, younger and older, as inherently and completely good, and to interpret their... So if or when I encounter behavior that contradicts that inherent goodness, that and that contradicts their inherent assets of flexible thinking, intelligence, resourcefulness, creativity. It's practically useful for me to hold out that vision, a vision of that person as with the assets and inclinations that I just described, and to interpret any contradiction in terms of their behavior as an outcome of distress.
Right.
And I say that as practically useful because for me it is a path to compassion,
right,
to empathy. It makes it easier for me to, the person who is irritated, the driver behind me who's irritated because I'm not driving fast enough, the person who treats me in a way that I experience as rude or in some way inconsiderate. It helps me to not take that personally because it's not personal when I can think, I'm imagining that there's some distress there. I don't know what it is. I don't need to know or ask, but there's some distress, and then the question and the opportunity to do in that interaction whatever good I can.
Okay, that makes sense. So then the good in this respect would be assets.
Yes.
You're specifically talking about assets.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Nothing more, nothing less. So you have to, I think it's important because like you said, you have your degree in linguistics. I think it's important when you have these conversations, especially with philosophical minds in terms of poverty, that we specify what exactly we mean by those terms.
Yes.
So, like you said, good as in assets, not good as in ethics, which is a different kind of conversation.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Awesome. So, what is your role in poverty? Or what does your work in relation to poverty? Or what is your work in relation to poverty? So what do you do?
Yeah, so as I told folks in our workshop, in our course together, as you heard me say, that I don't have the direct experience of poverty. I, in my recent adult life, have encountered folks who, with direct experience, having grown up in poverty. I worked in my early career as a teacher. I worked with students whom I would have understood to have had some experience of poverty, whether chronic or situational. And so,
for those who don't understand, those who don't understand what that is, could you explain what's the difference between chronic and situational poverty?
Sure. So, chronic poverty is frequently generational in terms of a whole range of circumstances that the person has known for the longest time in their life. It would refer to really limited access or lack of access to the resources that equip people to live in a satisfying way in the world: education, money, food, housing, experience in the world, relationships.
Which is a big one.
Yeah, which is a big one. And I should say that one asset that I've learned, so my learning about understanding people who live in poverty has really been learning as much as I can from first